The problem, I want to answer 5 questions, and the 5 questions are, number 1, what is the fuss factor? I hate fuss factor. Am I going to be calling, is it going to be a problem? Is it not going to work? Am I going to be calling and asking for help? I hate that. And if it's too much fuss factor, I know myself, I just won't even bother with it. So has there been a fuss factor? Number 2, speed. There's a lot of videos up on the internet saying, oh, they're throttling us and the speed's terrible and on and on and on, a lot of whining and complaining. Is the speed fast enough? And so we'll answer that question. Number 3, rain interruptions. I had TV, satellite TV dish for a while, and if you got a downpour, I mean a really heavy rain, you'd lose signal and it'd be gone, and you could just figure out whatever you wanted to watch. You weren't watching it if there was a heavy enough rain. So has that been a problem? Unfortunately, we've had one really good gully washer that I would have lost dish, and so I'll tell you all about that in just a minute. Number 4, if I'm in the mountains, which I always go to the mountains in the summer because I love mountains so much and I miss them in the desert. So if I go into the mountains and I'm in a valley and there's mountains all around me, will I be able to get signal? How narrow can I be and still get good signal from satellites? It has to find the satellites. If it doesn't, you're not going anywhere. So that's a good question. I've got an answer for that coming up. And number 5 is power draw. Now, normally I have plenty of power. I have 700 watts. But if you have 200 watts or 300 or 400, would that be enough? It ties into fuss factor. If I have to turn it off every night to save power or only have it on when I'm using it, will that create fuss factor? Will it start up and work every time? Or will it be a problem? And so I have an answer to that as well. So let's get started. So first, let's deal with fuss factor. So far, there has been 0 fuss factor. Setting this up out here is nothing. So the antenna just snaps onto the Starlink base, and that is bolted to the piece of plywood that is then staked into the ground. Couldn't be any simpler, no problem. It's a little bit of a size thing to throw around in the rig, but it's no big deal. I've been able to figure that out. And I got to have it for the desert because you can't set this thing up in the desert without it being attached to the ground. It'll blow away. 50, 60 mile an hour wind, and this thing's a sail and it's gone. But I have complete confidence in this. So fuss factor on this is nothing. And so far, the router doesn't even have an on-off switch. You just plug it in, it comes on, and it works. It's magic. I love when technology works like magic. You plug it in, you got signal. 5, 10 minutes later, it searches around, finds satellites, and all of a sudden, boom, you got signal. And it's worked that way every time. And I've been extremely happy with it. There's been no fuss factor. And we'll talk about power. Well, let's talk about power next. Will I have enough power? What about extended rainy days? And it depends on the size of your system. So the fuss factor has been non-existent, number 1. Number 2, ties into power, because if you have to turn it off every night because you don't have enough power, will that be a fuss? And again, there's no fuss. If you have to turn it off when you're not using it, it just starts up and goes. No big deal. And so that has been really good. I have 700 watts of solar, 2 lithium batteries, and so I have had no problem. We had an extended period of clouds, and so I did actually turn it off because I was afraid I'd run out of power. But again, because it just, the next day or whenever you plug it back in, it just starts up and goes just like magic. So, and that's what you may have to do. I would suggest you have 400 watts of solar, 3 to 400. Your first 200 watts of solar is probably just taking care of your normal needs and your fridge. Most of us will have a fridge and our normal needs. So you're going to need another 100 or 2 and an extra battery to run this. That's basically my recommendation. 200 extra watts, an extra battery to run your Starlink. So you got to factor that in. So the Starlink is, I think I'm paying $135 a month with the roaming. And I think the initial setup is now $650. Keeps going up. It's $650 or $700. And so you got to also factor in, may need some extra solar. I didn't because I bought plenty. I bought way more than I needed, and so when this came along, it wasn't an issue to me. But you better factor in some extra solar, 100, 200 watts, and an extra battery into the price of Starlink because you're probably going to need it if you run Starlink a lot. Number 3 will be speed. Is it fast? Have there been, I noticed these slowdowns? My answer is it is as fast as I could want. I never have to wait. I never have to, every so often starting a video, there'll be a spin and then it's gone. It's just completely fast enough. Is it lightning fast? I would say not. Now, one of the factors to bear in mind is I bought roaming, and so that has solved a lot of that fuss factor. If you don't pay an extra, whatever it is, I forget, $10, $25 a month. If you don't pay the extra, then you are going to have a fuss factor. So it's well worth it to me not to have that. You'll have to call them every time when you're not in your home area if you don't have roaming or RV service. So I have roaming and it works perfectly. The way that ties into speed is if you're not in your home area, you're deprioritized. Home area people come first, they get full speed, and if there's ever a slowdown, you'll be slowed down, not them. So that, I think, is the concern for a lot of people. But because and I think most of you, will be going out into remote areas, we're not getting the slowdown. So I have had no issues whatsoever. But again, I'm always in remote areas. So if I was forced to go into Las Vegas or Phoenix or Denver and had to be in there, but how would I set up Starlink? If I'm in my van or my ambulance or even in an RV, how are you setting up Starlink in a city? I don't think you are. And why would you need to? Because there's cell signal everywhere. So the one time you might have problems with deprioritize, which is a major metropolitan area or a bigger city where there's so many people, uh, you won't be using it. And so I don't think that's an issue. I don't think there will ever be an issue with being deprioritized and losing speed. My answer to the speed question has been fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it uh, in every way for the speed. Now, if some of you have ever been to Quartzsite in the winter and you use Verizon, Verizon becomes completely unusable. But as of now, I think that could happen in the future to Starlink, because if there were enough Starlink users, it could slow down the system. But I think it takes hundreds of thousands of users to slow down a system, which is what happens in a city when there are 100,000 users. But I don't think that would ever happen even in Quartzsite. So I don't think speed will ever be an issue. All right, question number 4. What about rain interruptions? Now, when I had Dish satellite TV, I often had rain interruptions. So a dish is, you have an actual dish, and it was a horrible fuss to set up, which is one of my fears why this would be a fuss, because that dish was an awful. I had to find the signal, and I had to spend the extra money to get it to align itself, and it was a nightmare. I had my compass out, and then if there was a heavy, heavy rain, not just a mild rain wouldn't have no impact, but a heavy downpour, I'd lose signal. If it was raining hard, I wasn't watching TV. Would that happen with Starlink? Would a heavy downpour cause me to lose signal? And say if I'm working and I need this signal, would I lose it? I'm glad to say we had one, well, I'm not glad we had a heavy downpour, but I'm glad to say that when we had a really heavy downpour, Starlink went right through it. We had no slowdown, we had nothing, no problems whatsoever with this thing. Heavy downpour had no impact. So now, could it be so heavy sometime in the future? I haven't been through every downpour that can ever happen. Maybe. I can't guarantee it. I can tell you it rained really hard. And we had some hail. We had it set up in hail one time too, that heavy downpour. And man, if anything, I would think that if anything would do it, these were pea-sized hails. We had the ground covered with hail one time. No impact on Starlink at all. So my answer right now to will rain stop it is I have not experienced that at all. Could it happen? Yes, it still could. I don't know. I haven't been through every rain that could ever happen. But no, right now I think rain is not going to be an issue. Any normal rain isn't an issue at all. So the fifth and final question I was concerned about, thought maybe wouldn't work, was narrow mountain valleys and deep forests. Will I be able to get connection in wherever I camp? Well, of course, the good news is that probably at least 5 months out of the year, I'm in the desert or high desert, and it isn't going to be an issue at all. I'm not going to have a problem in the high desert. I can find a place to set up the signal. But what about in the summer when I love mountains and I literally need to be in mountains? So as you can see, there's mountains behind me here. I specifically looked for a open area. I'm in a mountain valley near Silverton, Colorado. I love Colorado. I love to be in the mountains of Colorado. That's why I own the Yamaha side-by-side, so I can drive deep into the mountains with it. That's where I'm going to spend most of my summers for the rest of my life. Will it work with Starlink in these mountains and in these trees? Well, you have to find a pretty big opening, big open area. As you can see, it's mostly pointed up. I mean, that's a pretty good angle that it's pointed up. I specifically looked for an open area where I was confident I would get signal, and I have it here, no problem. And it did somewhat limit where I could camp in this deep valley with the mountains around it and the forests. I couldn't just go anywhere I wanted. I had to have a clearing, an opening in the forest. So there is a limitation in that. It was a minor limitation. I'm fairly happy with where I am. It's a little more crowded here. When you have a big clearing, more people tend to go to it, so you may not be as alone as you want to be. But I have a lot of places in mind where I'm going to go where there won't be hardly anyone at all because there's just that remote. Where I'm at right now is a very, very popular place. I'm stopping every 15, 30 seconds to let traffic go by here because it's a popular place. But I want to come here because it's so wonderful. So it's a bit of a problem. I won't deny it, especially in the dense forest because it's not going to see through trees. It's a little bit of an issue. I'm not going to deny it. I think I can get around it no problem. So far, so good. But it is something you're going to have to, it may change the patterns of your life having Starlink. But to my mind, it's so worth it. It's so worth it. I can go, see, I couldn't go to these places. There's not a lick of cell signal here. Not a lick. No internet, no cell signal. I'd be back in town, somewhere near the main road. And while there are a few problems, things that I would prefer not to have here because I've got people around me. I'm in a beautiful place and I'm not around a thousand other people in a major part of this area. So no matter what, I've won. I win with Starlink, even if I have to make some minor sacrifices with finding a clearer view of the sky. So what's the sum total? What am I telling you after a few months of use with Starlink? Absolutely 100% love it. Highly, highly recommend it. If you're a working nomad, you're a digital nomad, you have to have signal. Starlink's the answer. It travels easily. The hassle factor is virtually non-existent. It's easy to set up. It's easy to run. It works every time. Power draw will be an issue. You may have to add another 100, 200 watts of solar to power it. Add an extra battery. If you can do that, if you just factor in, that's the cost of doing business. That's what I look at here. This is a cost of my running a YouTube channel. I need constant internet access, YouTube access, access to everyone, email, Zoom meetings, everything. I'm involved in the nonprofit as well. I have a meeting coming up later today. I'll be in on a meeting for 2 hours on Zoom. I couldn't be here without Starlink. I could not be here without Starlink. So it's a cost of doing business. And if you're doing a digital business, it's just another cost. And at 125, 135 a month, it's not even a steep cost. I'm paying a lot more than that for internet right now, and I'm going to cut back on some of my internet because I've got this now. So I think the cost is not overly an issue. If you're not doing business, the initial investment of $600 to $700 is steep. The 125, maybe you can't afford that. You got to have a phone, and if your phone gives you your cell also, then this is a cost above that. You can't get rid of your phone. We all have to have phones. Can't function without them anymore, really. So the cost is an issue for a lot of you, and I know it is. But for a lot of you, it's just a necessary evil, and you have the money, and you just do it. You bite the bullet. Rain, I don't see as being a problem. If you're a rainy area, no slowdowns in speed. Speed is plenty fast. You'll have to make some concessions to where you camp in the mountains, in the forests. You'll have to look for a clearing. If you don't get a clearing, you don't get signal. It's just that simple. So a few issues, minor problems. Overall, fantastic. Highly, highly recommended. I love it. If you can afford it and you really want to spend that much money to know you have reliable, fast internet, Starlink's the answer. So what do you think? I'd like to hear from you. Would it be worth it to you to spend 125, 135 a month that it's going to cost you? And it changes all the time. By the time you are watching this video, it could already be different. So is it worth it to you? Would you spend the money? Do you have the room to carry this stuff around in? The router is nothing. The coil of cable is fairly long. but it's no big deal. The room's plenty. Doesn't take up that much room. I can find room. What do you think? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, if you got anything out of this video, like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and we'll talk to you later. Bye now.